welcome to the Diane McClay Show, empowering life through choice. Get ready to discover new perspectives, motivation, and balance through Diane's compassionate storytelling and insightful discussions. Whether you're feeling stuck and discouraged or curious and looking for more possibilities, Diane has your back, and she's ready to take you on a journey of self-discovery and expansion. Choice is powerful, and so are you. The Diane McClay Show starts now.
Welcome in, everybody, to another Reframe Friday on the Diane McClay Show, where we are always here to help you empower your life through choice. Thanks for joining Transformation Talk Radio and the Cornelia Stephanie Media Group. Fridays are always my favorite day of the week. There's so many good pieces of information that come out of all of our podcasters, and I'm so glad you made the choice to join us. If you haven't been watching, we are coming into episode 3 with my friend Cindy Lynn. Cindy Lynn is an integrative life coach and speaker with 25 years of experience in the healthcare industry on all sides of the page. She has been a registered cardiac nurse. She's worked in the healthcare industry in corporate America, and she's worked on the device testing side in the FDA. So when she says she knows what she's talking about, she really has the history behind it to prove it. Cindy Lynn is the what now nurse, meaning you've been diagnosed, you got that information, you have that news that's going to change your life and the life of other people around you, and now what? She is the one who can bridge the gap between the personal side of the healthcare needs and the prescriptive side of the healthcare industry. I like to say she's the bridge between the old and the new, and she's the bridge between them and you. Cindy Lynn, welcome in. Thanks for being with us today. Let's kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself and kind of recap where we've been over the last 3 weeks.
As we were talking before we got on the show, I can't believe how fast this time has passed, and we're already in our third official part of this series here. You do a great job of introducing me, and as I sit back and listen to it, it makes me feel a little bit old. But there's a lot packed into those years, and a lot of different angles of being the patient, of being in the system, of working outside of the system, of working in the US medical system and working for 3 or 4 years in the Canadian medical system to get a real contrast. So I'm excited to share everything that I've learned about best managing your care from any perspective.
Right. And what we've been talking about up till this point, and including this point, is really why it's important for the person with the diagnosis and then also their support system, why it's important for them to be a savvy consumer, why it's important for them to understand and know and communicate their own philosophy of care, and then to seek out treatment that fits within their expectations, their value system, and also within their pocketbook, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. Do you want to do a little quick recap? I know we've crammed a lot into our hour-long sessions, but do you want to do just kind of a quick connect the dots for our listeners who might be joining us now about why this topic of living beyond your diagnosis is important to you, and then why you are the person that people should be calling when they get that phone call or that news from the doctor?
Yes, it's a topic that's it's a huge passion of mine, because I've watched far too many people march through this very protocol-based medicine that we have in the US. And protocols make things very efficient, but it's very easy to become that number in the system and to not have personalized care and personalized medicine. And I think that has come to the forefront a lot in the recent couple of years, in terms of people looking for different options and being told, no, there's one path and one option and everyone must follow that path. But that really has been going on for quite some time, whether it's a chest pain, cancer diagnosis. And like I said, there's a wonderful efficiency in having a standard of care and having steps sort of lined up. But it's also really important to know that you can hit pause at any time. And people, I think, don't often do that in medicine because they don't know medicine. They do that in their areas of career. They do that when we talked about last time, shopping for a dishwasher, shopping for a car. We take time to learn and pause and check things out and make decisions and do that critical thinking. When it comes to medicine, people either aren't comfortable, they aren't knowledgeable, or the fear of hearing that diagnosis just puts them in a position where they can't do that effectively. And that's where I come in, because I can calm those fears and I can let them know what questions to ask and what are potential areas where this might be a decision point in the whole process. And we can do it right up front when you hear the diagnosis, or we can do it halfway down the line when you realize that things aren't turning out like you'd like them to, and maybe you need to rethink. And I can help anywhere along that spectrum.
Yeah, and I think that's great to hear. And what's going through my mind right now is that one of the reasons why I think you're the person to call is because of the vast amounts of experience that you've had. And I didn't realize you had experience in the Canadian medical system too. So that's like Canadian medical system, American medical system, on the corporate side, on the FDA testing side, as a patient, as a nurse, as a mom, as a parent. You really have touched many of the facets in this prescriptive medical system. And I think we've talked before about why it's important for you to start creating the shift. And what we do on this show is we empower people through choice. And what we're going to talk about again today is how much choice people actually have access to and that they can implement, even if they're navigating this prescriptive and efficient medical system, right? So why is this? Why do people not know that they can do this? Why is this not something people are just automatically already doing?
I don't know. I've learned a lot about that process and talking to people. But when I first began doing this, it was the default. It's just what I did. I asked questions, and why are we doing that procedure? Why are we doing it now versus at a different point? What are the pieces? What am I looking forward to? What are the choices? And people don't. People see that white coat, or they get the diagnosis, and there's the fear there. And the fear makes everything seem like an emergency. And we talked about this earlier too, that everything has to happen right now. Well, if it has to happen right now, then naturally you don't take time to stop and think. So first of all, understanding there's very little that you're going to hear as a diagnosis that's an emergency. Anything you're sitting in your doctor's office and hear, probably not an emergency. Doesn't mean it's not serious, doesn't mean it isn't terribly frightening to hear, but it means you have time. And when you have time, you can ask questions. If you don't know the questions you ask, call me. It's funny over time, the more that I've spoken on podcasts and the more that I've reached out and gotten broader audiences, I think the more sometimes people are hesitant to call because they think, well, I can't call her because I don't even know what to ask, or I'm not really sure what I need help with. That's the point. That's the entry point for all of this.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
That's what I'm here for. So we've actually put the link to my calendar to book in the show notes today, I think. Right. You said it would be, and it's just that simple.
Right. We're going to have Jacob, our producer, put those up for people to see when they catch the show on Transformation Talk Radio YouTube channel, or even on my YouTube channel, where these conversations are pulled out specifically into their own playlist. People will be able to catch that link. And it's not just even a phone call. It's like you can literally get on Cindy Lynn's calendar, and for 30 or 40-minute free consult, you can start asking the questions in a safe and productive environment to even get you to what is the next thing. And I think I interrupted you because I got excited about here's the invitation I want to put out to our listening audience. What you say is, hi, Cindy Lynn, I've just been diagnosed. Now what?
That's all you have to say.
Or you say, I don't know what questions to ask. And so what we've teed up in these last 3 segments is we've laid out questions to ask. We've laid out some steps. And I encourage our listening audience to go back to part 1, go back to part 2, and even go back one before that when we actually had Cornelia Stephanie on, and we were talking about kind of why this was important, and about changing the paradigm and changing the power, that the power dynamic is on the side of the people who have information, right? And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to help the underdog, help the common person get some more information in a logical, sustainable, non-emotional, non-judgmental, non-restrictive kind of way. Right?
That's it. And I think people also hesitate because they may have gotten a diagnosis that they think, well, a lot of people have this, I should know what to do. Or the other side of it is, I got this and it's not very common, and I wonder, maybe she doesn't even know about this. And here's the really interesting part. I don't have to know everything about every diagnosis. There's no way that I possibly could. The questions, the decision points, the pause, the way we gather information is the same. So I'm not going to tell someone what to do any more than they should allow their physician or nurse practitioner or anyone else to tell them what to do. What I do is say, have you considered this? Or have you, these are some other specialists that deal with your diagnosis. How would you like to bring them in to the situation? These are other possible support services. And it's opening them up to things that they may not have thought of. And they don't have to do any of it. There's no obligation. I'm not the physician who's putting you on a drug saying, take this. I'm saying, okay, if this one's not working, here are some ways that you can ask for something different. And sometimes it's a matter of helping with the words. We've talked about this before. How do you get a second opinion without, people are very worried about insulting their doctor. And if this is the person who's supposed to take care of you, you don't want to get them angry, right? But there's ways to do it that will maintain the relationship. And in fact, very often garner more respect. And physicians up their game when they know they have an engaged participant.
I can say that I know that's true also with veterinary experience.
Yes.
When I do research, my dog has a lump on her paw. I've done some Google researching, not that everything on Google is true or accurate or the most up to date, but I had a basis, okay? It could be these 3 things. Tell me about this thing. Does it look like it could be that? Mm-hmm. Tell me how I can treat A, if that's what it is. Tell me how I can treat B. What are my options for C if it turns out to be cancer? So I feel like I actually have a much more engaged relationship with my veterinarian because I'm articulating things that a vet would not normally be able to see in a 20-minute exam of the pet. I know when my dog is lethargic and when they're not. I know when my dog is eating more than normal or not. I know if my dog is regular bodily functions are, I know what that looks like. A doctor or a veterinarian in a 20-minute session or a 30-minute session isn't going to have all of the knowledge that you personally carry, either about your pet or about your own body. And so the more you can, without giving a litany of all the dirty details, if you can engage your doctor and say, here's some things I'm observing. Here's some things I'm experiencing. I'm curious about this. Are these things connected? It starts to show the doctor that you want to be an engaged participant in your own healthcare. It literally sets the car on that course, because now the doctor is responding to questions you're asking rather than just kind of talking around the general diagnosis, which might happen with a lot of people. Am I right on that?
Yeah. You're absolutely right on that. And there's a couple of things, and you can't necessarily fault doctors completely because they often see you not at your best.
Right.
So when they see you, they don't know how active, how engaged, what your expectations are. they may see a person who doesn't look very active, doesn't have high expectations of travel, mobility, sports, that kind of thing, um, based on that just short visit. So by asking questions that are relevant to your life and sharing information that's relevant to your life, that automatically sets the expectations differently. The other piece is, and this was a differentiation I made when I left the corporate world and decided that I wanted to work with individuals again, was that there is a large segment of the population that unfortunately uses medical care to go in, get a tune-up, go back home, not make any changes. 6 months later, be admitted again, get the tune-up, and that cycle just repeats. And for caregivers, for healthcare, it's extremely frustrating. When I was working in the hospital doing bedside nursing, working with the physicians, it was extremely frustrating to get a person ambulatory, walking, living their life again, and have them brought back in on the stretcher in a few months because they didn't make any changes. They didn't take their medications. They didn't do what they needed to take care of themselves. So there's a certain fatigue in physicians as well if they've dealt with a lot of folks who aren't taking responsibility for their own health and wanting to make those changes. So they need to know that you're invested in you, and then they'll invest in you.
It makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. And I hadn't thought about the kind of the exhaustion and the fatigue and the frustration that comes in if there's repeat customers. And we're not saying every person with a diagnosis is going to be a repeat customer, but if you have a diagnosis that's long-term, or it requires a complex plan or multiple parts of a plan, you're probably going to see the doctor more than once, right? I mean, if you have a knee replaced, you see him follow-up surgery, a week later, 2 weeks later, maybe you see him in 6 weeks, maybe see him in 3 months, and then maybe it's a year just to make sure everything's good, right? But if it's if it's something that needs ongoing treatment, then really what I think I'm hearing you say is we're helping people right now make the choice, to build a relationship with their care providers and the system, and to build a healthy relationship. And I'm teeing this up on purpose because we're going to be talking about how we heal the relationships that have been damaged, affected by, or negatively impacted by, or even just changed, if you want a neutral word. When a family member gets a diagnosis, relationships get affected one way or the other. And we're going to talk about ways that we can step into healing that. But imagine what it would be like if you actually didn't have to heal the relationship with your medical professional. You just from day one initiated a respectful, honest, open, provocative, communicative conversation that sets you on the path for your philosophy of care and your lifestyle that you want to live. That seems like that makes a lot of sense.
It does. It makes a tremendous amount of sense to set that stage from the moment you start working, that you want to be a partner in your healthcare. And there are people who don't want to be. And that's a choice as well. And we need to respect that choice. But for people who want to be a partner in that care, which means taking on some of the responsibility, communication responsibility, all of that, you can change the whole dynamic of that relationship. And I would also say that if you work with a physician who does not want a partner, who simply wants to prescribe, you may want to look for a different physician.
Well, let's talk about that real quick. So not just look for a different physician, but what would you say to somebody who's like, hey, I'm not getting what I need, or I'm not feeling heard? How would you advise them or coach them to initiate the process? Obviously, step one is call you. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Call you, get in a contract with you, get your services so that you can be by their side as a partner through the whole thing. But real quick for our listeners, if I don't like what's happening, or I'm not happy, or I'm just feeling like it's just not leading me where I want to go, how do I make the shift? Especially after my insurance company has already committed to this process, or financially, if I don't have an insurance company, I've already committed, and it's really a pain in the butt to have to look for somebody different. How do I cut through all of that?
So it absolutely is. And I've read many articles to people who say, go out and, just go out and interview 3 or 4 physicians. Well, that's not easy to do. If you're having cosmetic, reconstructive kind of procedures, that's a little bit more normal. But if you've already started down the path with a physician, we want to make sure that we've made the most of that, or that we've given that relationship that you've already put time and money in a way to work. So really, my first question to you would be, what is your philosophy of care? And if you're not able to articulate that to me, then chances are, with the pressure of the time constraints and that kind of authoritarian positioning of physicians, you probably weren't able to communicate that to your physician either. So that's what we would start, because even if you end up outside of that relationship with that physician, if you aren't able to articulate that, you may end up choosing, it's like any other relationship. If you don't fix what happens as a relationship goes bad, you may take that on to the next relationship, whether it's a physician, a partner, any of those kinds of things. So figure out what went wrong, make sure you're able to articulate what you need, give him a chance to understand and respond to that then. And then if not, look for the specific details, things that are missing, because perhaps they can be filled with other paraprofessionals, other kind of support staff, or even more non-traditional providers.
Right. And so you're saying if I can't make it work with my existing physician, then you could work with me to help me kind of start to bridge and navigate to a new one. But let's talk about, if I've already invested some time and I've already invested money and my insurance company has already bought off on the prescriptive care that's being delivered, what would you say to me or to someone else who's like, I really want to stay with my doctor, but I just don't know how to tell him I'm not getting what I need? I mean, if I'm going to fix the relationship, wouldn't it be smart for me to say, hey, there's something that I'm not getting, but how do I do that if I'm carrying fear, or I'm giving in to the authority figure, or I don't have confidence in myself?
And that's something we would work on together. So I have a very, very accessible, very simple to do one-day program. One day we spend together mapping all of this out, and it's the navigation, it's the mapping. And we would start with the communication. So again, in a real non-stress, non-hurried way, together we'll wrap the words around what you're not getting, what you'd like. We look at what you could expect to get from that physician, and then perhaps other individuals who could provide that. So for example, if you got care for an orthopedic issue and the physicians pretty much said, you're complete and I've discharged you, if you need more, you might be better off looking for physical therapy or chiropractic or other types of individuals to meet those needs, rather than going kind of dipping back in that same well that door is already shut on that particular diagnosis and treatment and billing code, for example.
Right. And that sounds brilliant. You mentioned that you have a simple one-day program to kind of get people started. And I don't want to box you into a corner, but generically, give me a ballpark figure of what that type of a service might cost me as an individual. And the reason why I'm teeing it up that way is I also want to say, what does it cost me if I don't? Like financially, what might it cost? Ballpark figure, generally speaking, because I know it changes from case to case and it depends on what services people get from you. But I guess where I'm going is why should I invest in you this amount of money? And what do I get out of it to make sure that my other investments in the medical system pan out?
So, yeah, we do. That's a great question. And we can get the best idea if it's a good fit on a free call. So there's no investment at all to find out if you actually like talking to me. And if I can meet the needs that you have. If we decide to spend that day together, and very often it's virtually, just like you and I are talking here, it's $497. And we spend the day, you get a written plan that I help you devise, and then you get follow-up for a number of weeks afterwards, contact with me as you make plans or make calls or do these things. So it's very simple. It's not a long-term commitment. It's not classes that you have to learn how to all to do all of these things, we do it. We do it together, and then you have a plan.
And $497 to say that I could have a strategic plan that I could literally go into my doctor's office, my doctor's, the physician's assistant, the nurse, whoever the providers are that are being engaged to help me manage my diagnosis. It seems like that's a pretty reasonable investment to make sure everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands my philosophy of care. Everybody's working for my best interest to get me to live in that philosophy of care, and that I return to the standard of living to the best of my ability and what the diagnosis allows me to do. That seems pretty reasonable. I mean, it seems almost ridiculously reasonable.
I really want it to be accessible because this is really important. The other piece, besides the whole physician piece, the other piece that we map out is how to ask for and get the support you want from the individuals around you. So from your non-professional support system. And that's some tricky communication sometimes. And sometimes it's difficult to identify those people or know who we want to ask to do what. So we map that out together. And it's fairly easy for me on the outside to kind of tease out that information. And then again, together we put a plan in place that you can execute, and then check back in with me if you have questions.
On our last show, we joked about us being old enough to know what AAA is and triptychs, where you basically take a big trip and you get little flip open books that tell you where things are and how to navigate to them and what the stars are of the restaurants or the hotels. But it really sounds like you're in day one. You can make a medical triptych for people that actually makes communication with everybody around them considerably easier. So if that's true, which I believe that it is, why would I not want that? Why would I actually not want to engage you in that prior to having a diagnosis? To me, it's like preventative maintenance on a car. You know, people take their car in for an oil change, whether they've driven 5,000 miles or not. So I guess as we move into our break, I'd like to really challenge our listeners. Here's the questions I have. Have you personally been diagnosed with something and you feel fear, anxiety, stress? Please jump on Cindy Lynn's free link to schedule a free call with her. Do you know somebody in your family that you're assisting with a diagnosis? You too should jump on the link. And then I encourage you to think about, what is my strategy and what is my plan in case something happens to me down the road? It's not a question of if. It's a question of when are we going to get some level of diagnosis that changes how we live through life. So as we go into break, ask yourself those questions. And if you say, yes, I have a diagnosis. Yes, I have a family member or a church member or a school board member or a work comrade who's struggling, then make sure you tune back in right after the break, and we're going to help you create those relationships. And we're going to help you mend the relationships that might have been impacted by the diagnosis. Cindy, last minute goes to you. Anything you want to say before we jump in?
I think when you talk about mending those relationships and the people around you, a plan for what you want is very important. Having them understand that is also a huge piece of making the entire process easier.
Excellent. With that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Thanks for tuning into the Diane McClay Show, where every day we try to help you empower your life through choice. Welcome back, everybody. You are listening to the Diane McClay Show. I appreciate you making the choice to tune into us on your Friday. I call it Reframe Friday, where we get to learn lots of different things on Transformation Talk Radio and the Cornelia Stephanie Media Group. We are always being challenged to look at things from a different perspective and to hear and use different language to get what we want in life. And that's what I mean by empowering your life through choice. We're talking today with Cindy Lynn, who is she used to be a registered nurse, cardiac nurse. She's had 25 years of experience in the medical world on different sides, patient, parent, mother, daughter, corporate healthcare advocate. And she's really shifting into gears being your personal healthcare advocate. We were just talking about how we build a relationship with our medical professionals and how we actually try to build a team of people around us when we get a diagnosis. And we're going to shift gears now and talking about healing some of the relationships that may have been affected negatively, maybe not negatively, but when a diagnosis shows up, you're not the only one who gets impacted by it. So Cindy, take us in. What have you observed? What have you seen? How do diagnoses affect the people around us? And what do you bring to the table to help us heal that? Because we might not even know those relationships are broken.
Well, I think sometimes it's probably easier to tell when the relationships at home are broken. I think people recognize those more than if they're struggling in a physician relationship. They're more accepting of that. At home, when everything goes to hell in a handbasket, as we say, that's a lot more obvious. But it's a very strange balance of power. So when one person has a diagnosis, it shifts all of the relationships around them. Because even though we interact as we always have as human beings, all of a sudden the idea of getting mad at Diane if she's got a diagnosis, if she's sick, I can't get mad at Diane. I just have to suck it up. I can't say what I want to say because she's having a hard time. And you may feel, if I'm one of your support caregivers, that you can't say what you want to me because, if I get upset, that may be the end of grocery, delivery. I mean, those are kind of the extremes, but those are the way relationships evolve and are impacted if you don't have a plan going in. And
there's kind of a negative power struggle, right? And
yes.
it whether we want it to shift or intend for it to shift, it does. In almost every experience you've had with any patient you've had, you've seen this on some level.
Yes, we see it at home. We see it in the work environment. That's also very difficult. And it's part of the reason that the identity of the diagnosis becomes such a big part of things for people, is that it's reinforced by the relationships, by how others respond to you. And it happens at home. Like I said, it happens very much at the office as well, where you go from being a highly contributing member of the team to maybe having to step back, being a part-time contributor, and attitude shift, and people treat you differently. And it's very hard to come back to that previous level of performance, for example, in the teams at work. The same thing happens less formally at home. So it can be a real shift in a marriage, a tremendous shift. If the person who's the primary breadwinner is unable to do that, what does that do to an identity? If it's the person who's the primary caretaker for the house and the meals, and they can no longer do that, what does it just do for their identity, as well as that kind of balance of things at home? And those are the two real obvious kind of things that we see. And really, no matter how much relationships evolve and no matter how much changes, people in the house, regardless of gender, tend to take on typical roles. And when those roles are upset, people don't really know what to do with that. And if it's upset for a day or a weekend or a week, that's one thing. If it's upset for months, it gets real confusing and communication becomes a real challenge.
What have you seen? What is, let's talk through, we'll talk about healing a relationship, and we're talking kind of vaguely about ways relationships can break or be impacted, but let's get into the nitty gritty of it, right? Are you talking about being communicative about how the roles are going to change in advance? Are you talking about how people feel about their role changing? Tell me what you observe, and tell me kind of how because this is a really complicated piece, and we're definitely not going to cover everything that you do in the next 30 minutes for sure, but give me kind of an overview of, once we identify, yep, it's not, something's changed, I don't feel great about it. How does it affect the diagnosed person? And then how does it affect the other people? And how do you help people navigate that, as to use your word?
So very much of it is expectations. I always joke that 95% of life is managing expectations. And when we have that plan with our physician, And not that everything or anything with the diagnosis goes to plan, but when you can set the expectations of this is what my schedule is going to be for the next 6 weeks, then you can make adjustments. And very often what we find, or what I've seen with people who have chronic diagnoses, um, things like chronic Lyme's, fibromyalgia, uh, just chronic fatigue like symptoms, is that the people around them can become quite resentful. And whatever kind of diagnosis we have, we typically have good days and bad days. And whether that's chemo, radiation, whatever the case may be. And when you're having a good day, it may look to the people around you that you're fine. Why is all of this extra work for everyone else put in place? And then the next day you may be back in bed again. And there's that balancing of expectations. There's sharing enough information so that people understand. And most of us want to be, yep, I'm fine. I can do it. I can take care of it. Be superwoman. Sure, I can still handle it. And then not. So we set ourselves up for failure by having expectations that are unrealistic, and we set our housemates and our coworkers up for frustration when we can't meet the expectations that we've conveyed to them. So it's really the ball is in your court as the person with the diagnosis or the person with the illness, in order to communicate clearly that yes, I'm going to have good days, I'm going to have bad days. When I have good days, this and this are my priority, and making sure that the people around you know those things.
And know them in specifics, it sounds like.
Yes.
It sounds like to me like there's an invitation here to sit down and as the person with the diagnosis, maybe even ask the question, what are your expectations as we navigate this? In married couples, there's still, there may still be an expectation of some level of intimacy. Well, how do you meet that expectation? A, if you don't know what it is, and then B, if you feel like crap, right? And intimacy isn't the only thing we're talking about here. We're talking about words and house chores and what it takes to just exist and get through the day. But it sounds like there's a beautiful opportunity here for people to literally say, let's take 20 minutes. I'd like to know what are your expectations when we go to the doctor? What are your expectations when we create a treatment plan? And then I'd also like to share with you what my expectations are. Right? If my mom has people coming into the house to help her, I guarantee you one of her expectations is that somebody makes the house presentable and easy for that extra caregiver to come in and move around in, so that she doesn't feel embarrassed about not having the house be the way she would normally have it if normal company were coming over. Right? So my mom may have to say to somebody, I have an expectation that the house get vacuumed twice a week. Right? Now, if the person who's living at home doesn't want to do that or can't do that, then it sounds like that actually sets up, okay, now we got a parking lot list of maybe we need to bring in a cleaning service to help facilitate the expectations that person would have about their home. Am I tracking that right?
And that's that whole piece about building the support team of people around you. So it's not medical professionals necessarily, but is it having someone come in and clean the house periodically? Because frankly, if you're on chemo and you're having a good day, probably not how you want to spend your energy.
Right.
Is there other needs that need to be met? And that's identifying who can do what for you, learning how to ask for it specifically so that the people can say yes or no, and not being afraid to ask for that help. And so many people are afraid to ask for help because they're, I can't possibly have someone help me with the laundry because my laundry room's a mess and my linen closet's a disaster, and whatever the case may be. But having those relationships before something happened is really important. Stop in your life, and who do you know that could come to your house, put fresh sheets on your bed, and do your laundry? That would do it as a friend to take care of you if you couldn't.
Right. Right.
And then look beyond that to things you may potentially have to hire.
Right. So we're kind of talking about a lot of layers. And this is another reason why people really need to get on a strategy call with you. And Jacob, when you can pull that address up again, that would be great. But one, to get on a strategy call, because a diagnosis has multiple layers. There's what now with the medical side. There's what now with the prescriptive treatment side. There's what now with what are the options and the alternatives. And then there's what now with relationships and team members and people that are you're going to have to rely on to get through this, whatever it is. Right. So again, this is another reason why a 1 hour show really is not going to cover it. And I really encourage people to go to cindylynn.com and check out her website, check out her services, sign up for the free ebook about how you can talk about your diagnosis and still have your privacy and still maintain control. That is a really critical component. But honestly, making the investment to spend a day with Cindy and get a strategized, personalized plan, I think you can save yourself a lot of headache. So I want to flip it back to you, Cindy. What else do you want to tell us about healing the relationships or helping the people who've been impacted? We won't necessarily, they're negative, but what do you want to tell us about what you've observed and how you know you can help?
I think one of the real turning points, because there's a lot of sympathy, there's a lot of empathy, and there's a lot of energy that individuals around you have to put in acute stages of an illness. And then as time moves on, it gets a little bit more difficult. And I see one of the biggest struggles is people who don't want to acknowledge that, or they don't want to bring it up. They don't want to talk about it. And maybe these treatments are dragging on. Maybe I thought I was going to feel better in 6 weeks, be back on my feet, and the hip isn't healing as well as you thought it would. These kind of things are difficult to talk about because somebody may say to you, okay, well, Diane, when is it going to get better? And you don't know. You don't have an answer. And that's the point at which you say, I don't know. I don't have an answer. These are the actions I want to take. And let's come back and make sure we talk about this in 2 weeks or in 4 weeks. So we weren't asking for this open-ended support for unknown situations. You know, at some point you may want to make some permanent changes to things. The need to revisit that on a regular basis and be willing to talk about it is a big piece in making relationships better.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The other piece is that being sick is a very intense time of turning inward. And you need a plan for an exit strategy from whatever kind of diagnosis that you have, so that you can turn outward again and begin to engage again and begin to contribute in an emotional and relationship level, even if you have a chronic diagnosis that goes on.
Points well taken. And I'm sorry I talked over you. I was going to ask, like you had mentioned that the person with the diagnosis, really, there's a lot of onus on them to initiate the conversation about expectations. And that might be things about what chores around the house or meals or whatever. But let's shift it a little bit about what's the responsibility of the person who doesn't have the diagnosis, but who's on the team. And how do they support that person, but still get heard as a person with their own needs and their own expectations?
So personal boundaries are a part of every healthy relationship, whether it's a marriage, a parental relationship, business relationships, and having those boundaries in place for yourself is the first piece. And then you can convey and interact based on those. So if you aren't able to take care of the things you normally do, I don't automatically assume that I need to pick up all of the slack for all of that. Together we sit down, if it's in the household, together we sit down and say, okay, I can do this and I have time to do this. These are the remaining tasks, events, whatever the case may be. And then together we make a plan on how those work out. So as a support person, having those healthy boundaries to say, yes, I can do this, and I can do this and this, and that's really all I have the capacity for right now. Let's call in some other support people.
Sounds like you're writing a prescriptive permission slip. You're writing an RX for the people who are in the household that don't have the diagnosis. Sounds like you're saying it's okay to say, here's some things I just don't have the capacity to do.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I'm sure that if somebody shifts the role and they now are taking on the majority of the breadwinner job, probably the last thing they want to do is come home and take on a full-time job of maintaining the house and making sure the food gets prepped. So it sounds like there's not only a permission slip, but almost it's a prescription. It's a get your white pad out, sign your name to it, and say, you have to have a conversation about when you're tired, when you're exhausted, what you have the capacity to do, what you're willing to do, and what you'd like to negotiate getting help on for the person who does not have the diagnosis. And conversely, it's the same, that you're writing the prescription for the person with the diagnosis to do exactly the same thing.
And we see that, I see this break down the most in some of my older couples, where they're self-sufficient. They don't want someone coming in from the outside. They've been managing together for many, many years, and they want to do it. They take pride in doing it. And sometimes they don't want to risk someone thinking that they can't take care of it all. So the caregiver gets extremely fatigued, and very often you see health implications there. On the other end of the spectrum, with younger clients, if someone is the primary breadwinner, then perhaps it's not realistic to expect them to attend every appointment or every treatment, for example. Maybe you agree that they attend treatments or attend appointments where there's maybe new information or updates on the diagnosis where you might need more emotional support. And then you have a friend or another relative that accompanies you for routine treatments.
Right.
And that kind of schedule interaction isn't rocket science. And as you listen to it, you probably say, well, yeah, but very often people don't do that.
Well, and it's taken me back to sort of my example of, it's why people need to sit down with you for that free consult. And it's why they actually need to spend the money to, in the grand scheme of the cost of a diagnosis, $500-ish is relatively cheap compared to the amount of money that would get invested into medications, caregivers, support staff, doctors, taxi rides, Uber rides, whatever, right? And so it really what I'm synthesizing right now as you're talking is, when we establish a philosophy of care, which you can help people identify and write down, and when we can identify the values that we carry that are associated with this, if there's more than one person in the household, I would imagine that you start first with the person with the diagnosis, but then it might even be helpful to say, okay, let's bring in whoever the spouse or the partner is and say, let's understand what your philosophy of care is. And if there's differences that we already know up front before we go into all of the processes, that this might be something that might need to be negotiated or communicated or engage an outside professional to even help more. Right?
Yes.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like we're basically taking the relationship in for a tune-up before we get drugged down the road of all of this prescriptive, exhausting medical care that may or may not have an end to it, or may not look like it has an end to it. Then it also sounds to me like, once we establish the philosophy of care and everybody knows what it is, and we also have input from our loved ones and from the people around us that are going to be in that support circle, we can now start creating those management tools up front and as we go, rather than after the fact.
Yes.
Right. And that, to me, that sounds that sounds like it's that if I can avoid an argument with somebody that's going to help me,
Yes.
that's worth $500 right there. So, and then once we do that, then everybody is now functioning from relatively the same or similar place.
That's key. That's a big piece of it. And that starts sometimes from the very point of diagnosis, where we have the individual with the diagnosis who's considering the different treatment possibilities, and a spouse or a parent with the absolute best intentions who wants everything done right now because they're operating out of so much fear. And we talked about that on the very first show in this series, that you want to choose your support people and your information sharing people rather selectively, so that you get the support you need and you don't get a lot of extra fear and a lot of extra worry piled on. But it's a delicate balance in that. But that's one of the very first things. So knowing your philosophy of care and having that discussion with your partner, your spouse, your parent, whomever, ahead of time is kind of the best way to go. If you don't know how to formulate one of those, or how to ask yourself the questions, all right, what do I value? What is important? And that evolves over time. And I can certainly, the first thing we do is create that document, really, that piece of information. And then depending on what comes out of that, you may choose to make that formal in a living will kind of situation, or another formalized way of making your wishes known. But we start basically with, what are those values?
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into what happens when you become incapacitated to engage your philosophy of care the way you want to. So, man, that's another show right there, right? What happens if you don't articulate this philosophy of care and you don't become a savvy consumer of the medical system, meaning that you don't set yourself up to make sound judgments based on your philosophy of care? What happens if your diagnosis takes a turn for the worse and you no longer are in the driver's seat of those decisions? I mean, I can only imagine how relationships could get impacted that way. If there's not clarity on the philosophy of care, that could tear families apart. And it has. I mean,
Yes.
we've had news stories of people being in hospitals and having a different version of philosophy of care by several family members.
And I've seen that. I've seen that at the bedside more than once, where siblings have very different ideas about what treatment should be done for parents,
right,
at end stages. And it's sad and unfortunate and not necessary.
Right. And so having this strategy, having this conversation piece up front really helps to, if relationships get negatively impacted, we have some neutral platforms that we can come back to and reassess and reprioritize and reevaluate. What else do you want to say? We've got a couple minutes left before we jump to the next show on TTR. And I really, really appreciate you bringing this topic and this conversation into series with me as my featured sponsor on the Diane McClay Show. Last parts are yours. What do you want to leave people with, and how do they find you if they are dealing with a diagnosis and they need someone to help them navigate it?
Absolutely. Jump on a call. The link is there. I'm more than happy to talk with you, and it costs nothing. And then have these conversations at home. Have these conversations with loved ones tonight. And it's easiest to do it when you're not sick, when you're not having problems. Say, hey, I was listening to this radio show and they started talking about this philosophy of care, and what is your philosophy of care, and what does that mean to you, and how would you want to handle it if something came up? And you don't have every eventuality, but you get a sense of what the person's values are related to their health care. There's people who want to make all the decisions. There's people who don't want to make any decisions. They just want to kind of plug and play. All of it's great as long as you know what it is, you're making that decision for yourself, and you're getting the support and the help you need. And I would love to be there for you.
Well, I would love to have you be there for me. And I would love, love, love to have you come back on another show, whether you extend your sponsorship or not. I would love to continue this conversation because I think it's critical and it's a tool that everybody has to have in their pocket. This conversation is with Cindy Lynn. She is the What Now nurse. She is a personal healthcare advocate for you. And I've coined the phrase that she is the bridge between old and new. And she is definitely the bridge between them and you. Cindy Lynn, thank you for being here. The power of your health is in your own hands. We have now empowered you to make positive choices by engaging the tips and strategies that Cindy Lynn has shared with you. I encourage you to go to cindylynn.com, check her out. Go to the Cornelia Stephanie Media Group app. Also on your Google Play Store, Cindy Lynn is one of our featured practitioners in that app, and you can get more information about what she does, how you can access her ebook, and you can connect with her through the app as well as her website. Parting words?
Thank you so much. This has been fabulous.
Thank you, Cindy Lynn. The services you are providing, I think, are critical, and I absolutely endorse you. Everybody needs to make you the first phone call to make if they hear of a friend or family member who gets a diagnosis. I hope people hear me when they say, it's not a question of when a diagnosis is going to cross your life. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And wouldn't it be amazing if you had a lot of this stuff taken care of and prepped before that even comes across your path? I'm Diane McClay. This is the Diane McClay Show, and we always empower you to empower your life through choice. Thank you for tuning in with us on Friday. We hope to see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Diane McClay Show, where you are empowered to enact change in your life through choice. You know that little voice in your head that's been telling you to pursue that passion project? Or maybe it's been screaming for you to go outside and explore the great outdoors. That voice is you, and you deserve to be heard. Listen, make a choice, make a change, and watch yourself grow. For more information about Diane or to work with her personally, visit dianemcclay.com.